Hello there. Thank you for joining us for Cafe Jesus today. It is St. Patrick's Day, the 17th day of March, Thursday. And without further ado, we ask the Lord to bless this session, Lord. Thank you for all those who are tuning in now to learn and honor you, Lord. May you use my mouth and my lips, my mind, and speak through me, Lord. But also move me aside when it's just me, Lord, that your Holy Spirit may shine. And now, Lord, let's go to these things written for our example, the good, the bad, the ugly. There's nothing withheld in the truth and the word of God. Judges chapter 16. Let's get to...
Are you walking with God in a real way? Listen closely to Adrian Rogers. Does God...
That's not what we wanted. Sorry about that. Somehow we messed up. And there we go. There we are. Samson
went to
Delilah.
Gaza, and there he saw a prostitute, and he went into her. The Gazites were told, "Samson has come here." And they surrounded the place and set an ambush for him all night at the gate of the city. They kept quiet all night, saying, "Let us wait till the light of the morning, then we will kill him." But Samson lay till midnight, and at midnight he rose and took hold of the doors of the gate of the city and the two posts, and pulled them up, bar and all, and put them on his shoulders, and carried them to the top of the hill that is in front of Hebron. After this he loved a woman in the valley of Sorek, whose name was Delilah. And the lords of the Philistines came up to her and said to her, "Seduce him, and see where his great strength lies, and by what means we may overpower him, that we may bind him, to humble him. And we will each give you 1,100 pieces of silver." So Delilah said to Samson, "Please tell me where your great strength lies, and how you might be bound, that one could subdue you." Samson said to her, "If they bind me with 7 fresh bowstrings that have not been dried, then I shall become weak and be like any other man." Then the lords of the Philistines brought up to her 7 fresh bowstrings that had not been dried, and she bound him with them. Now she had men lying in ambush in an inner chamber, and she said to him, "The Philistines are upon you, Samson." But he snapped the bowstrings as a thread of flax snaps when it touches the fire. So the secret of his strength was not known. Then Delilah said to Samson, "Behold, you have mocked me and told me lies. Please tell me how you might be bound." And he said to her, "If they bind me with new ropes that have not been used, then I shall become weak and be like any other man." So Delilah took new ropes and bound him with them, and said to him, "The Philistines are upon you, Samson." And the men lying in ambush were in an inner chamber, but he snapped the ropes off his arms like a thread. Then Delilah said to Samson, "Until now you have mocked me and told me lies. Tell me how you might be bound." And he said to her, "If you weave the 7 locks of my head with the web, and fasten it tight with a pin, then I shall become weak and be like any other man." So while he slept, Delilah took the 7 locks of his head and wove them into the web. And she made them tight with a pin, and said to him, "The Philistines are upon you, Samson." But he awoke from his sleep, and pulled away the pin, the loom, and the web. And she said to him, "How can you say, 'I love you,' when your heart is not with me? You have mocked me these 3 times, and you have not told me where your great strength lies." And when she pressed him hard with her words day after day, and urged him, his soul was vexed to death. And he told her all his heart, and said to her, "A razor has never come upon my head, for I have been a Nazirite to God from my mother's womb. If my head is shaved, then my strength will leave me, and I shall become weak and be like any other man." When Delilah saw that he had told her all his heart, she sent and called the lords of the Philistines, saying, "Come up again, for he has told me all his heart." Then the lords of the Philistines came up to her, and brought the money in their hands. She made him sleep on her knees, and she called a man and had him shave off the 7 locks of his head. Then she began to torment him, and his strength left him. And she said, "The Philistines are upon you, Samson." And he awoke from his sleep and said, "I will go out as at other times and shake myself free." But he did not know that the Lord had left him. And the Philistines seized him and gouged out his eyes, and brought him down to Gaza and bound him with bronze shackles. And he ground at the mill in the prison. But the hair of his head began to grow again after it had been shaved. Now the lords of the Philistines gathered to offer a great sacrifice to Dagon their god, and to rejoice. And they said, "Our God has given Samson our enemy into our hand." And when the people saw him, they praised their God. For they said, "Our God has given our enemy into our hand, the ravager of our country, who has killed many of us." And when their hearts were merry, they said, "Call Samson that he may entertain us." So they called Samson out of the prison, and he entertained them. They made him stand between the pillars. And Samson said to the young man who held him by the hand, "Let me feel the pillars on which the house rests, that I may lean against them." Now the house was full of men and women. All the lords of the Philistines were there, and on the roof there were about 3,000 men and women, who looked on while Samson entertained. Then Samson called to the Lord and said, "O Lord God, please remember me, and please strengthen me only this once, O God, that I may be avenged on the Philistines for my 2 eyes." And Samson grasped the 2 middle pillars on which the house rested, and he leaned his weight against them, his right hand on the one, and his left hand on the other. And Samson said, "Let me die with the Philistines." Then he bowed with all his strength, and the house fell upon the lords and upon all the people who were in it. So the dead whom he killed at his death were more than those whom he had killed during his life. Then his brothers and all his family came down and took him and brought him up and buried him between Zorah and Eshtaol in the tomb of Manoah his father. He had judged Israel 20 years.
And it is interesting that he judged 20 years during that time. That is the end of the word of the Lord for Judges chapter 16. Seemed like a tragic end, but if you pay attention, God did hear his prayer, although it was selfish. He was thinking about avenging his eyes. But God's purposes are even greater, to teach the Philistines a lesson for being pagan and disobedient, and bragging about their god Dagon, as well as freeing the children of Israel from their oppression. So it's twofold. And if you note in Hebrews chapter 11:32, Samson is mentioned among the great cloud of witnesses in the household of faith. So, it wasn't so much his hair, it was his relationship with God, and he grew back and he repented and he asked God to help him. He repented at the end of his life. It'd be interesting to see him on the other end. Now, there's a lot to uncover in this, saga or episode of Samson. He went down to Gaza, and he found a prostitute or a whore, and he went into her. Most Levites, I read about their restrictions. They are careful to not eat certain meats or stuff like that, or do certain things. I don't think that one was listed. So obviously, Samson's in big sin here. He knew he crossed a line that he shouldn't have. And it is an example how a man so used of God can also sin so blatantly, as we saw with the late Ravi Zechariah. Looks good on the outside, not too good on the inside. Now, Samson wanted to be used of God, but his problem was he wanted 2 things. He wanted to live the way he wanted, so worldliness as well as God. You can't do that. You either serve God or you serve mammon. And he yielded to the deceitfulness of his sin, which in his case, some are drug addicts, some are alcoholics, and some can't keep their eyes and hands off of women. And that was one of his problems. And it's the problem of many a man today. So before you judge holier than thou, think about it. Samson kept his Nazirite vows outwardly and zealously, but really he was sinning blatantly, this time with a prostitute. And this prostitute is a different woman than Delilah. It's not the same woman. God still gave him supernatural strength to escape from the Philistines. God did this because his purpose was much bigger than Samson himself. But because Samson liked his sin, he used Samson despite his sin, not because of it. But Samson hung around in his sin, and that was his problem. He didn't want to leave. And so Samson fell in love again, also with a woman that was completely wrong for him. It's another example of the pain and ruin that came into Samson's life because he did not guard the wickedness of his heart. And the word Delilah means delicate, and we find out that the lords came to her. There's 5 lords for the Philistines, as we found out in Deuteronomy from the cities. Delilah was also deeply in love, but not with Samson, the love of money. And they offered her 1,100 shekels, up to 140 pounds of silver, 63 kilograms each. Now, that could be up to 5,500 shekels, up to 700 pounds of silver. And so she was like a man on a mission, kind of like wanted Billy the Kid reward. Well, she was all in for that. She didn't care what it took to take down Samson. She was on her mission. And so Samson lies to Delilah about the source of his strength. Now, the source of Samson's strength was not obvious. Perhaps he wasn't big and muscular. The honest answer to her question would be, I may be bound with attention and affection of an ungodly yet attractive woman. In other words, I'm seduced by pornography, by prostitution, by harlotry, by doing as I please, the Nike creed. If it feels good, just do it. God speaks against that. It's for your own good. Samson could have easily seen Delilah's heart by the way she immediately was trying to bind him, much like the first wife, and what he deceptively said he could be bound with. And the fact that he did not tell her the truth showed that he knew her dangerous intentions. Still, he toyed with it. And she asked him a second time. And, of course, he gave another little fable and said it was a lie for a second time. Yet, when you're deep into the secrets of your sin, it's a good example of how an ungodly relationship can warp your thinking. Have you ever been with a woman like this? That you'd sell your soul just to have sex with her? Many a man is like caught in that trap. I mean, oh, she's so beautiful. Oh, unlike any other woman. And then they realize after she leaves him and abandons him, the loneliness in the heart, the great wreck of carnage, the tragedy spiritually of what took place. So awful is sin, we should avoid it. Delilah took new ropes and bound him, and he refused to escape the situation. Why? Because when you're in similar places of sin and you're familiar with it, compromise and bondage, why escape? He was enjoying it. He was in her presence. He liked being in her presence, no matter what it would cost him. Now, Samson lies again a third time, and tragically, Samson's heart was with Delilah. He actually did love her. But her accusation inverts, like the devil does. He tempts, and then he blames. He turns around and blames you. And this is a manipulative projection of her own heart, which was not with Samson. He says, oh, you don't love me. Why don't you tell me the secret of your strength? All the meanwhile, if somebody was trying to kill me 3 times, I don't think I'd want to stay there. Yet, because Delilah nagged him day in and day out, she also used her wiles, certainly sinned by using terrible manipulation. Samson also sinned, yielding to that manipulation. And when Samson did this, it was a very sad scene. Because you know what? There comes a time when God does give you up. If that's what you really want, and you want to walk away from God and walk with the world or walk with whatever it is your desire that's not God, well, He'll let you do it. The consequences, oh, they can be more than painful. In fact, God was merciful to Samson here. But no doubt, Delilah used sweet words to lull Samson to sleep again. And her pretended love for Samson for the sake of money is also deeply troubling. And then she began to torment him. And this is fitting, and not as if she didn't torment him every day of his life. Samson was arrested, and we see later his ultimate demise or death. Samson is seized by the Philistines. He didn't know things were different. He was so used to being in compromise, he didn't think it'd make a difference. He thought God would always be with him, no matter what he did. And that's the problem of Proverbs 14:12. We think we can go our way, and we find out in the end it's not God's way. Samson's strength was not in his hair, it was in his relationship with God. He worked against that relationship to the point where God finally departed from him. And so Samson, they gouged his eyes out, blinded by his imprisonment. In fact, it's probably the only way they got him to work. He was grinding at the stones, and almost, yeah. If he didn't have any eyes, he couldn't be attracted to any woman. So he was attracted to ungodly relationships through his eyes, and his failure to restrain that brought him into bondage. And it will bring any man, and even a pastor. Many, I think 40 to 50% of pastors recently said that they watch pornography, and many are unfaithful to their wives. And this is what the devil does. He divides and he sifts those who have a heart for God, but yet fall prey to the weaknesses of the flesh. And so they bound him with bronze fetters. He did not humble himself in obedience. God insisted on freedom. He insisted on his freedom of doing what he wanted to do, and this left him with no freedom at all now. Sin has its wages. This was Samson's payday. Left him blind, slave, and bondage. Now, before Samson's blindness, bondage, and slavery were only inward, but now they have become outward. So don't think you have a secret that only you know or you can get away with. God knows. God gave Samson hope, though, in the midst of the dungeon. His hair began to return, and we suppose that his heart also began to return. He remembered how God helped him before. So Samson's mocked by his enemies, and the message preached by the followers of Dagon was clear. Our God is better than your God. Our God is better than yours, because we've conquered Samson. Often the disobedience of God's leaders leads others to deny God. Very tragic. Samson's bittersweet death. God answered his last prayer, and he did achieve his greatest victory against the Philistines, for it cost him his own life. Samson is the hero mentioned in Hebrews 11. So he pushed with all his might on asking the boy to put his hands on the pillars because he said he needed to rest. And the temple, when he pushed, the temple fell on the lords and all the people who were in it. And this could only happen if God was supernaturally empowering him. He killed more people in his death than he than he did in his life, and he killed a lot. This was 3,000 dying that day. And this shows that God never forsook Samson. Even though he was disobedient, God's mercy was there for Samson, even in a Philistine prison. All Samson had to do was turn his heart back to God. There is a particular point I missed here that I wanted to kind of bring up. Early in the chapter, it says he pulled up the city gates and the two posts, and he took them and put them all on his back. Doesn't that kind of give you the impression of Christ walking up to Calvary with his cross? We can see Christ in every single book of the Bible if you look for him. Well, I can tell you one thing, men. No matter how pretty she is, how much sexual favor she's promised you, I can tell you one thing. It's not worth it. Because blind as Samson became, blind you will be when we keep your eyes off of God. Well, it was a bit long today, but thank you for tuning in. May the Lord bless you and keep you. Have a wonderful day. I think we covered much here. Now, I look forward to seeing you on the other end if the Lord doesn't tarry. But if he does tarry, I'll see you tomorrow. And I'm asking his blessing upon you, that he may use you in a special and strong and new way. Now, if he woke you up this morning, you give him thanks and praise. And if you're breathing, remember, every breath that we have is of the Lord, for we are just dust of the ground. Have a great day.